What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about an X-Men book that I finished reading recently. X-Men Supernovas. This is written by Mike Carey with art by Chris Bachalo, Humberto Ramos, and Clayton Henry, and Mark Brooks. This collects a whole huge heap of X-Men comics, issues 188 through 199 and Annual 1. This is right around the exact same time that Ed Brubaker was starting his Uncanny X-Men run with Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire. And basically, the premise here is that Cyclops asks Rogue if she wants to put together her own team of X-Men, basically to go out on missions and protect the school, but they're not located at the school, and they have no teaching commitments. They just go out and they do missions at any point that they want. And that's kind of the starting premise here. And this is 3 storylines that are collected here, or 4, I guess, if you count the annual as its own storyline. Basically, the first 6 issues, there is this group of what I will call super mutants. They are called the Children of the Vault. And basically, there was this group of scientists back in the 1970s, and they were able to speed up time within a certain area of space. And so they were able to do that inside this giant ship, and then in a span of 30 years, 6,000 years passed in the ship. So you got these people. Basically, they're mutants, but we're told that they're not really mutants and that their powers actually come from technology, and that since so much time passed for the Children of the Vault, they are basically their own separate species. And after the events of M-Day, the Children of the Vault came out of their ship, and they're thinking, okay, we're going to take over the world. We were supposed to be released from our time stasis thing whenever everyone on this planet was dead, but the energies released from M-Day released them early, so now they are going to kill all mutants and humans so that they can take over the planet. It's kind of sort of similar to how Cassandra Nova was the next step up from mutants in Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, but it's a little different, and I really like these guys. I thought that they were a very valid threat for the X-Men. They definitely weren't a pushover. And then you get the annual story, which has Exodus. Basically, he's trying to find out where all the mutant births are going to happen, and then he finds out, just as the reader has known for a little while, that after the events of M-Day, there were no new mutant births. After Scarlet Witch said, no more mutants, it was no more mutants permanently, or at least, as of the story, it was no more mutants permanently. So Exodus, he is trying to start up a new, I guess a new Genosha is what he calls it, or new Genosha, whatever. But then he finds out that there are no new mutants happening, and then he goes and he joins Mr. Sinister, and as of this volume, we don't really know what that's about, but you'll find out more about that in the next volume, and then also in Messiah Complex. And then after that, there is a story where we find out there's a scientist guy named Pan, or Pandemic, and basically he is wanting to live forever, and in order to do that, he wants to absorb the powers of mutants. And this is probably my least favorite story in the book, partly because it's drawn by Humberto Ramos, and I've said before, I don't really like his artwork. I will say I liked it better here than I have in other places, and I think partly I just really like the idea of him rotating with Chris Bachalo. You'll have Chris Bachalo for an arc, then you'll have Humberto Ramos, then Bachalo, Ramos, and I really thought that was a good method of utilizing both of these artists with very different styles. And I like Bachalo a lot more than I like Ramos, but I really like the idea of switching these two guys out for an arc. But this story, basically this doctor guy, he was a friend of Professor Xavier, and shortly after Rogue had joined the X-Men, apparently, Professor X had taken Rogue to this Dr. Richard Palance guy and was trying to see if Palance was able to find a cure for Rogue's powers, and that kind of got Palance interested in somehow using Rogue as the basis of this project where he would be able to live forever by absorbing mutant powers with every mutant that he made skin contact with. And he does this by somehow taking mutant powers and giving them to a virus and then injecting himself with that virus. And not a whole lot happens in that story. Basically, Pan is kind of, he was responsible for some stuff that the X-Men were fighting at the very beginning of this book, before the Children of the Vault attacked. Rogue rescued, Rogue and Iceman and Cannonball, they rescued Lady Mastermind and Omega Sentinel from a lab that was being run by Pan's people. And basically, we find out everything Pan does in this book is to try and get Rogue in a trap. He's trying to lure her somewhere so that he can capture her, and then he can use her as a guinea pig to see if his process of becoming an immortal will actually work. And a lot of the science stuff doesn't really make any sense in that story, but it was an okay story, and it gives Rogue this virus called Strain 88, and then from that point we go on into the final story of this book, where Cable takes her to this island nation that he is the sovereign leader of. I think the nation is called Providence, and there they are trying to cure Rogue, and then we find out that there is this Shi'ar super weapon called Hecatome, which is coming to Earth, and it has followed a Mumudrai. Mumudrai is another thing from Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men. Basically, it is your evil psychic twin. Everyone has a Mumudrai. Most of the time, the Mumudrai dies, but every once in a while, it doesn't. This Mumudrai was from a Shi'ar person out in the middle of nowhere several hundred years ago, and it fled to Earth, and then the Hecatome followed it to Earth, and so it attached itself to Lady Mastermind, and the Mumudrai did. And then it's trying to get the X-Men to stop the Hecatome, and then Rogue eventually absorbs 8 billion souls into herself. She touches the Hecatome, and then that stops the thing from destroying Providence and eventually the world, but then she absorbs all these minds into her body. Now, Rogue is a very strong-willed person. She has to be, because she has had lots of different conflicting personas in herself for a very long time now, pretty much since her powers first kicked in. I do not buy that she would be willing to take in 8 billion people and be able to function as a human being. She would just completely go insane. Rogue herself would be lost in the shuffle. I don't buy that she would be able to absorb that many people all at once. But overall, what do I think of this book? I kind of went by really fast because I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about each storyline separately, but since 2 of these stories are only 3 issues long, it wouldn't have been a very long video for the second or third storyline at all. So I just wanted to go ahead and talk about all 3 of these stories together in one video. I really like this book, and I really like the beginning of Mike Carey's run. Mike Carey, in a good way, was able to really capture what made Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men for 16 years work so well. He has a really good team dynamic. He's got new, interesting villains. That is a very important thing for X-Men comics, I think. Far too often, you've got writers who come in and they say, okay, we've got some really good ideas, we're going to do some really cool things with these characters, but then mostly they're just reusing the same 4 or 5 villains that we've been seeing for the last 30 years. I really like that Mike Carey, throughout every story here, he uses new villains, except for in the annual. You've got the Children of the Vault, who I really liked. You've got Pandemic, who didn't make a lot of sense, but if he had been fleshed out a little bit more, maybe if that story had been 4 issues long and we could have gotten a little bit more on how he's doing what he's doing and why he's doing what he's doing and what he is doing, I think he could have been really interesting. And then the Hecatome, you really didn't need 4 issues for that. I think 3 issues was a fine length for that storyline, but he basically is just creating a lot of new and interesting ideas for villains. Now, the Hecatome is loosely based on the concept of the Mumudrai from Grant Morrison's New X-Men, but he's still creating a new villain. And I really like that he was doing that. That's something that not enough creators do in comics these days. Most of the time it's like, okay, let's do a new Apocalypse story. Let's do a new Magneto or Mr. Sinister story. They don't create their own characters to intermingle with these classic characters that have been around for longer than I've been alive. So I really like that he creates a lot of new and interesting villains, and I really like the team dynamic that he's got going on here. Rogue has a mix of good guys and bad guys on her team. You've got Mystique, who actually came to the school shortly before Mike Carey's run began in Peter Milligan's run on X-Men, and she's hanging out here at school, and Rogue takes her into the team, not because she trusts Mystique, and she doesn't trust Mystique, and rightly so. She says, basically, I need to keep an eye on Mystique. Nobody else is going to. I need to be there to make sure she doesn't stab anyone in the back. And then you've got Sabretooth, who he was aware of the Children of the Vault, and the Children of the Vault wanted to keep their existence a secret, so they were hunting down Sabretooth, so he comes to the school to say, hey, protect me, you're giving mutants sanctuary, I need sanctuary. And then they inject him with nano sentinels to try and keep him under control, and that doesn't work out too well, but I really like the idea of him, at least temporarily, being an ally of the X-Men, at least under these circumstances. It kind of is something that we've seen before, yes, in the late 90s in X-Factor, you had Mystique and Sabretooth were both forced to work for the government on a superhero team, so it's kind of sort of something that we've seen before with villains working with the good guys, but in this case, I thought it worked really well. And then you also had Lady Mastermind, who, at first, she only joins this group because it's personal, because Pan and his scientists were experimenting on her and had her in a lab somewhere in a coma. We don't even know how that happened, how she got put into a coma, but at first she's only helping helping them to try and get back at Pan. But then she stays with them for the next storyline where they go to Providence, and that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense why she would stay with them, because not enough time has passed where she gets to feel like these people are her family. And I could have made that, I think that could have been made to work. In the past, you've seen stories where like Rogue or Emma Frost or the Juggernaut joins the X-Men, and at first they're like, no, I'm still my old self, I don't like you guys, but then over time they come to like and trust the X-Men more and more. I think that could have been made to work here, but it seems really weird that after just working with the X-Men for about 3 issues, then suddenly it's like, yeah, she's going to stick around and hang out with them while they go to Providence and they're trying to cure Rogue. So I thought that was a little bit weird, but overall, I really love this book. I would say this is one of the very few X-Men books that I would point to if someone said, where is a good place for me to start if I want to get into the X-Men? I think this is a really good place to kind of get your feet wet a little bit and try and figure out, okay, I like these characters, I like this character, I'm not really sure about that character, I want to learn more about him. That's something that I think you could do very easily with this book. So overall, I really like this book. I think it's a really great start to a pretty good run that lasted a good long while, 6 or 7 years, I think. So those are my thoughts on X-Men Supernovas, written by Mike Carey, art by Bacalo, Ramos, Brooks, and Henry. And if you guys like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will be back later in the week with some other videos, and I will be talking about some more Mike Carey X-Men stuff next week. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day, and I will catch you later. Have a good one.